Plato is as miserable as Hitler because Plato is as vicious as Hitler. Again, this is just the Stoic view. The Instagram bro posting a picture of his Lambo and captioning it with a Marcus Aurelius quote is nothing new. Real Stoicism, no bueno either, okay? In fact, worse than pop Stoicism. The ideas are even crazier and more unlivable. Externals can't harm the Stoics' happiness because in the event they can, they just kill themselves and call out virtue. Do you see why now that Stoicism is the most ingenious coping mechanism ever derived? The Stoics talk a big game about agency, power, choice, freedom. There's no free will period in their system. They are strict determinists. If you like Stoic intuitions, just follow Aristotle instead. In this lecture, I'm going to tell you why I think Stoicism is wrong, why it's counterproductive to try and live as a Stoic, and what better philosophies we can adopt if we find Stoic intuitions appealing. I've spent the better part of last year studying ancient Greek, interviewing the greatest Stoic scholars alive, and reading Stoic texts. But the deeper I've dug into the theory, the more dissatisfied I become. And just to be clear, I'm not a Stoic hater. In fact, at the end of this lecture, I'm going to tell you why I will keep reading Stoic texts despite thinking they got it all comically wrong. In the past year, the Stoics have genuinely become my friends in some very meaningful sense. But sometimes, the best thing we can do for a wayward friend is to set them straight. So the goal of this lecture is to launch a systematic attack on Stoic philosophy. It's nothing short of declaring war against one of the most powerful, one of the most influential movements in the past 20 years. Frankly, I'm not that concerned. What the hell are the Stoics going to do? Meditate on my death? Journal ferociously? I think I'm good. Now, the real reason that I wanted to make this lecture is to put forth a critique in public discourse that pushes back against the meteoric rise of popular Stoicism. Because I think you've often heard it said, that's just the pop Stoics, okay? Go read the real Stoics. And I'm here to tell you, real Stoicism, no bueno either, okay? In fact, maybe worse than pop Stoicism. Somehow the ideas are even crazier and more unlivable. So what I'm going to do in this lecture is I'm going to first develop a critique of popular Stoicism out of Nietzsche, and then a critique of real Stoicism out of Cicero, before sharing with you guys what I genuinely do find valuable about their philosophy, okay? So the goal of this lecture is for you to walk away with not just an understanding of what the Stoics have gotten wrong, but all the valuable parts of their theory that I think they got right and that we should take away and absorb into our own lives. So I begin with a critique of pop Stoicism, and I quote to you Nietzsche. Stoicism may well be advisable for those with whom fate improvises and who live in violent times and depend on impulsive and changeable people. Is our life really so painful and burdensome that it would be advantageous for us to trade it for a fossilized Stoic way of life? Things are not bad enough for us that they have to be bad for us in the Stoic style. Nietzsche's point is that Stoicism is a coping mechanism. For people who have been so molested by fate, for people who have completely lost control of the external world. And what the Stoics do is that they go to these people and they say, look, none of this matters, okay? You lost friends, you're experiencing pain, you don't have any pleasure, you lost your honor. None of this matters because external goods are indifference. And Nietzsche's point is that the Stoics, that people latch on to this tenet of Stoic philosophy, not because they've considered it, they've reasoned to it from first principles. Certainly not because it's intuitive. It's highly unintuitive. But because it's psychologically comforting, okay? And I think that's quite a good diagnosis, if not of real Stoicism, then of pop Stoicism. So in fact, I got into Stoicism myself as my first foray into philosophy in the exact same way. So I dropped out of school. I was building a company. Company wasn't doing so well. I was in a new city where I had no friends and family, and I was struggling in my health. And I remember just picking up the first Stoic self-help book, not even finishing it, just reading half of it and falling completely in love. Not because I reasoned through the philosophy, right? These pop Stoic books don't have the philosophy, but because it was so psychologically comforting to be told, rejection can't hurt you, lack of success can't hurt you. And I've had 2 conversations in the past month alone with friends of mine who came to Stoicism in the exact same way. But it's not just feeble-minded people like me and my friends, okay, who are so easily seduced. Cicero, as we'll talk about today, was often quite critical and skeptical of Stoic ideas in most of his work. And yet in his book called The Tusculan Disputations, he basically reiterates Stoic doctrines hook, line, and sinker. Okay, what are the Tusculan Disputations about? They're about coping. Okay, the Tusculan Disputations was Cicero's attempt at self-consolation after he lost the civil war, Caesar's in charge, his friends are dead or in exile, and on top of all this, his beloved daughter had just died in childbirth. And it was in Cicero's attempt to cope with all of this that he took on the standard Stoic doctrines that he so forcefully dismantles in his other works. This is Nietzsche's point. These are the circumstances, these are the people that Stoicism is made for. And this is true even for the Stoic greats, okay? So Zeno, the literal founder of Stoicism, wealthy man, wealthy foreigner, he was shipwrecked on his way to Athens. So suddenly overnight, he lost everything. He was a foreigner stranded in an alien land. And he just had a massive turn of fortune. And it was literally in response to this exact event, this exact tragedy, that he turned towards philosophy, from which Stoicism developed, okay? And this is also true for the great Roman Stoics, like all things Nietzsche. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Epictetus was a literal slave, okay? He was born and raised a slave. The guy literally had no freedom. Seneca nominally was Nero's tutor and Nero's advisor, but was de facto Nero's captive, okay? And who was Nero? Well, let me put it this way. Nero killed his own mom, killed his own stepbrother, killed both of his wives, the second one allegedly, countless senators, and almost all of his political rivals, okay? That's the type of person that Seneca was a captive to. And so Seneca is the poster child for exactly as Nietzsche puts it, someone who depends on impulsive and changeable people. All right, this is what a Stoic might say in response. But clearly Marcus Aurelius was not a slave of fortune, right? He was the opposite. He was the emperor of Rome. I don't think that's right. I think it's precisely people on the edges of society that are most exposed to fortune. So Marcus Aurelius was forced against his will to become emperor because the previous emperor, or 2 emperors before, Hadrian, handpicked him despite his own scholarly inclinations as well as sickly disposition. And his entire political career was just putting out one fire after the other in the empire. So Marcus Aurelius first had to deal with the Antonine Plague, right, one of the worst plagues in antiquity, and then a massive barbarian horde had invaded Rome, and just as he was getting all of that under control, his own general rebelled in Egypt, which he had to deal with. And his personal life was not much better. So Marcus Aurelius had 13 kids. Most of them died before they reached adulthood. His surviving heir, Commodus, was an absolute freak show, and likely his wife cucked him. Okay, so Marcus Aurelius the emperor lived no less turbulent a life than Epictetus the slave. It's precisely the slave and the emperor, it's the homeless man and the billionaire, who are most exposed to the turns of fortune. Now, if these are the people that Stoicism appeals to, then I think we should view the rise of Stoicism today in our society as a symptom that something terrible has gone wrong, okay? And let me give you an idea, a historical idea of what I mean here. In the Roman Republic, when there was relatively quite a bit of freedom, there weren't that many Stoics. Cato the Stoic, the guy who killed himself after the Civil War, was quite an odd man out for being Stoic. But when the empire came around, when people started losing their political freedoms en masse, that's when Stoicism surged as a kind of collective coping mechanism. And therefore, I think we should be equally alarmed that so many people today find this exact tenet of Stoicism appealing. But let me be clear here, okay? I'm not saying everyone who gets into Stoicism uses it as cope. Just agreeing with Nietzsche, I think it's a common psychological phenomenon that people latch onto, even unbeknownst to them. So that's Nietzsche's critique. And I think it works for pop Stoicism, again, if not for real Stoicism. But now I want to push this critique even more. Stoicism is not just a coping mechanism. It's the most ingenious coping mechanism invented by man. Because right when they tell you all these external goods are complete indifference, they then give you full license to pursue them by calling them preferred indifference, okay? So all of those external goods, health, wealth, good looks, noble birth, are again legitimized by Stoic ethics. And what this means is that it's very easy to take on Stoic ideas, to call yourself a Stoic, without actually having to change anything radical about your life. Because compared to other ways, right, people find consolation, let's say the Christian way, there's a God who will judge the souls after you die. Or the Buddhist way, right, karma will give people their fair share. If you actually believe in those ideas, your life has to radically change, not just the people you hang out with, not just what you do, but the very targets of your striving have to be aimed from this world to the other world. But the target of Stoic action, what they call the scopos of your activity, remains exactly the same. It's still wealth, health, honor, protecting your friends and family, right? And so even though the Stoic is supposed to evaluate, is supposed to value these goods in a radically different way, from the outside looking in, the Stoic kind of just, for most of his life, just looks like a regular person targeting the goods of this world, okay? And it's this particular branch of Stoic philosophy, the Preferred-Indifferents, that have led to the most outrageous manifestations of modern pop Stoicism. Okay, Stoic techniques for getting laid, Stoic techniques for making a shit ton of money, prosperity gospel Stoicism. Now you might think, look, clearly this is a modern perversion, right? Well, not really. Like the greats, again, the greats themselves were accused of this. So let me tell you a story. Seneca, when he was in exile, his first exile, a lot of his estate was confiscated. He lost a lot of wealth. This is what he wrote in exile, okay? Cope alert. It is the spirit that makes men rich. It follows us into exile, and in our deepest isolation, money matters no more to the spirit than to the immortal gods. Gemstones and gold and silver and large polished tables are just earthly weight. A spirit that is free and true to its own nature can't love them, since it is light and swift, prepared to spring toward the heavens whenever it is released. Okay? That's what our friend Seneca wrote when he was exiled. Now he comes back from exile, he finds his previous pupil Nero in the throne, and suddenly he's one of the most powerful people in the empire. So what does our free-spirited friend do? Does he donate the rest of his estate away? Does he, create a Roman YMCA for homeless kids and a soup kitchen? He proceeds to make himself filthy rich. I'm talking 300 million sesterces rich. Okay, put that into perspective. The entrance bar for the senatorial class, okay, this is the 1% of the 1%, this is the very height of Roman wealth and power, is 1 million. Seneca had 300 million sesterces. And this kind of moralizing against wealth while in exile and hoarding of wealth as soon as he got the opportunity prompted the exact kind of responses from his fellow senators that you'd expect. Okay, so here's a taste. By what kind of wisdom, by what teachings of the philosophers has Seneca heaped up 300 million sesterces in 4 years? As a palace insider, the childless and their estates are being scooped up in his net. Italy and the provinces are being drained away by his outrageous money lending. Okay, so the worst part of all this isn't just the amount he made. It's not just the ridiculously short time. It's how he made it, okay? Gifts from Nero. Gifts from people who sought access to Nero. Confiscated properties from political purges. High interest loans, okay? So do you see why now that Stoicism is the most ingenious coping mechanism ever derived? Because you're out on your luck, you're not doing so well, money is indifferent. It can't hurt you at all. But now you want a self-serving narrative to justify your greed? Oh, but money is a preferred indifferent, okay? It's only natural that we pursue money. The Instagram bro posting a picture of his Lambo and captioning it with a Marcus Aurelius quote is nothing new, okay? This is a common perversion of Stoicism, given how they set up their theory. But I want to be crystal clear here. This is not real Stoicism, okay? None of these are real Stoicism. These are all perversions of Stoicism, likely perversions, but perversions nonetheless. I think Nietzsche's psychological arguments should make us really, really suspicious of this movement, but nothing more. The fact that it is a coping mechanism doesn't tell us anything about whether it is right or wrong. It could be both a coping mechanism, and it doesn't have to be wrong. To now show you that it is wrong, I will move on to a direct critique of Stoic ideas themselves, okay? So we're done with the critique of the excess of pop Stoicism. We're now moving on to a critique of real Stoicism. And the first thing I'll highlight is that the kind of ethical advice that seems so practical and useful and intuitive and benign and innocuous that people go to Stoicism for doesn't really make sense outside of their religious system, okay? So what we're going to do in this section is we're going to start off with seemingly the most commonsensical, the most sensible of advice. And I'm going to show you how that leads you to a belief in Zeus, okay? So here's the advice. Focus on what is up to you. All right, that seems pretty reasonable, right? What do the Stoics think is up to us? The short answer is assent, okay? A-S-S-E-N-T. So the Stoics see man as a rational machine assenting to a whole set of rational propositions. So even when we are doing seemingly non-rational actions, behaviors, attitudes, we're actually assenting to rational propositions, okay? So if you shove me and I become angry, the Stoics think it's because I assent to I have been harmed. But if I turn around and I see a car whizzing by and I realized, you just saved me and my anger goes away, it's because I stopped assenting to I have been harmed. Okay, so that's how rational Stoics think human nature is. These assents are the only things that are up to you. Everything else, not up to you, okay? So whether it's the economy, it's the weather, it's what your partner thinks about you, even your body is not up to you. So this is how far they go. Opening or closing that door right there, they would say, it's not up to you, Jonathan. What if you slip on the way there? What if an earthquake hits the room before you get there? What if a Stoic member of your audience tackles you to make a point? Please don't do that. The Stoics would say, look, Jonathan, if you're going to tie your happiness into undependable things, like being able to close or open that door, then your happiness is not going to be fully secured, okay? So that's the view. Assents are fully up to you. Nothing else is up to you. Here's the question I want to ask the Stoics. It's not a critique yet, it's just a clarifying question. If your bar for up to you is so high that closing that door is not up to me, then in what way are assents up to me, right? Think about something like money is a good. I think most of us in this room would assent to that. Money is a good. Because assents are at least partially socially determined. So if you grew up in a materialist culture, if from day one your parents, your friends, everything in media has been telling you money's good, money's good, money's good, it's not so easy to treat money as an indifferent, right? Just ask our friend Seneca. In fact, there are people who know that their concern for money, that their greed is costing them. And they try everything to try to stop assenting to this. They go to therapy, they journal, they still can't stop assenting to it, right? So how can assents be up to me? And this is not only true for money, by the way. Think about how difficult it is to assent to pain is not an evil, sex is not a good, prestige is not a good, the death of my kid is not an evil. These are assents that the Stoics think not only can you make, but that you should make. But they seem a lot less up to me than just closing that door, okay? Now the Stoic is gonna say, well, but you're not trying hard enough. If you move to a socialist country, if you surround yourself with bohemian artists, if you journal every day, eventually you're gonna assent. Money's not a good. Okay, but if I put down anti-slip mats, if I earthquake-proof the ceiling, if I hire a bodyguard, then eventually I'll close that door. Okay, so again, no critique so far, just a clarifying question. In what way are assents up to me if, like the external world, they also seem to be determined by prior causes? the Stoics have an answer to this question. In fact, they agree with the intuition because they believe in fate. Okay, here's the plot twist. This is one of the biggest misconceptions that the pop Stoics have of real Stoicism. The Stoics talk a big game about agency, power, choice, freedom. There's no free will, period, in their system. They are strict determinists. And so it's very misleading. It's going to happen a lot. What they mean when they say up to you is nothing like what it sounds like. When the Stoics tell you happiness is up to you, they do not mean you have an inner citadel that is above the causal chain. They do not mean you can overcome the tribulations of fate and become happy even when fate dictates you shouldn't. They do not mean you could have acted differently in the past to be happy now. They don't even mean the future is open and you have the choice of becoming happy, okay? Whether you are, were, or will be happy, fully determined. When they say happiness is up to you, all they mean is that happiness proceeds out of your character. Here's the more technical way to put it. Your character is always and only the primary cause of your happiness, okay? And what your character is simply the disposition to assent to different things. So it's just another a deterministic part of the machinery of the universe. Okay, if that's confusing, here's an analogy from Chrysippus. This is one of the greatest analytical philosophers in the Stoic tradition. Let's say I'm pushing down a cylinder and a cone equally down a hill. The cylinder rolls. The cone kind of does a little U-turn and comes back halfway up, okay? So in this analogy, the shape of the object is the shape of your character. And his point is to show how the exact same external circumstances, when reacted to differently by different characters, can result in radically different outcomes. Okay, so if your kid dies and you're miserable, but Marcus Aurelius' kid dies and he's still happy, then the cause of your misery is not your kid dying, because Marcus's kids died and he's still happy. It's your character. It's your vicious character that is centered the wrong way. That is what they mean by happiness is up to you, okay? Not that you could have assented differently, but the reason you are miserable is because of your character. So it's not a statement about choice or free will, it's a statement about causation and responsibility. And this analogy really, really gets the point across, because it's evident. Neither the cone nor the cylinder have free will. The cone turns because it's a cone. You assented poorly because of your vicious character, okay? And so this is why I said the Stoics fully agree with the intuition behind my clarifying question. Given my character at this moment, given my entire causal history, given the external circumstances right now, I can't do anything differently but to assent to money is a good. Okay. To summarize where we're at, I asked the Stoics a clarifying question. What the hell do you guys mean, up to you? And their answer is that up to you only means whatever proceeds out of your character. That's where we're at. That's the view. Here's the critique. What determines if I'm a cone or a cylinder? Okay, here's another way to ask it. If you tell me what proceeds out of my character is up to me, by that very standard, is my character up to me? At first glance, the Stoic answer seems to be yes, because they think that your assents shape your character. Okay, so if today I have a money-loving character, I assent money is good, tomorrow I'll be more money-loving. But it can go the other way too, right? So today I'm money-loving, but for some reason I assented against that impulse, I say money is not a good, and tomorrow I'll be less greedy. And so what the Stoics paint is a picture of character, giving rise to a sense, shaping character, giving rise to a sense. So it seems like your character is up to you. But here's the issue. This is not an infinite chain. Your character and your sense need to start somewhere. And the Stoics think that reason develops in your youth. And so there is a moment when you make your first proper assents. But what is your character at that moment determined by? It's not proper assents. You haven't made any. It's by biology, heritability, sociality, and environmental factors, all of which are not up to you, okay? So it turns out the first link in this long chain that has deterministically led to who you are is not up to you. But if that's not up to me, then my current character can't be up to me either. Okay, so again, I'll just summarize the critique. The Stoics tell me what proceeds out of your character is up to you. But by that very same standard, we can show your character is actually not up to you. But if your character is not up to you, then what proceeds out of your character can't be up to you either, okay? So the Stoic definition is not only misleading, it's self-defeating. If as a child, I was raped, I was molested, I was abused, I was drugged up, and I formed a vicious character, and because I kept on doing vice, do we really want to say that my vicious actions now are fully up to me? And let me be clear here. The Stoics don't think like if you start off with a vicious character, you're just kind of screwed. The Stoics fully recognize a virtuous character can perform vice and cease to be virtuous. A vicious character can progress significantly towards virtue. But that doesn't help either, because whether you choose to assent against your dispositions, there's no free will either. Everything is determined by the initial state of the character, the external circumstance, and your assent, all of which in the origin point is not up to you. Okay, this might sound like academic quibbling, but there's a very, very practical point I'm trying to drive home, which is that the Stoics are wrong to cut the world so neatly into the internal world that is up to me and the external world that is not up to me. Doing that not only comically reduces my agency in the real world, closing that door is not up to me, but it also overlooks all the different ways that my internal world is shaped by factors outside of my control, okay? So this is what Epictetus would tell you. To have wealth is not within our power, nor to be healthy, nor to be of good repute, nor in short, anything other than our sense. This alone is by nature immune to hindrance and restraint. And this is what Marcus Aurelius would have you believe. How easy it is to not assent to every disturbing or alien impression and then be at once in complete calm. But there's a clear bait and switch going on here. When the Stoics talk metaphysics, up to you just means this thin, whatever proceeds out of your character. When they give ethical advice, they bloat up to you until it sounds like a libertarian free will. But Epictetus and Aurelius are wrong on the Stoics' own grounds, okay? Contra Epictetus, assents are hindered by the initial state of your character. That's not up to your control, and all the assents up until this point. And so contra Marcus, it's not easy at all to not assent to certain things. This is a perfect example, by the way, of what I think to be a great intuition, just rendered completely unusable by the Stoic system. Okay, after reading the Stoics, I genuinely think to myself, I thought about this yesterday, is this thing up to me? If it's not, what's the point? That's great advice. But the only way I can absorb that advice is by transplanting it out of the Stoic definition of up to you onto a much more reasonable view. Okay. But there's an even deeper issue here, which is, let's say that the Stoic up to you definition is totally fine. Why should I only focus on that which is up to me? What if I just put my foot on the ground and I say, look, my child's life is crucial for my happiness, even if it's not up to me? It turns out this simple prescription, focus on what is up to you, is not self-standing, but actually grounded on a deeper ethical claim that all externals are indifferent, including your child's life, to your happiness. So you should focus on your assents, not just because they're up to you, but because they are the only things that matter for your happiness. Okay, so that's the next claim we're gonna critique. So what we did is we interrogated this one claim and we found out it's not self-standing, and we need to go now deeper into the Stoic system. And this is gonna happen again and again. So many of the Stoic doctrines that at first sight sound so good are actually reliant on a lot more foundational claims that get more and more radical until we get to Zeus, okay? So the claim we're going to examine now is that externals are indifference, virtue alone matters for your happiness. What virtue is responding well to whatever circumstances you're in, okay? So what virtue is essentially everything that comes out of your assent. It's your behaviors, it's your attitudes towards life, it's your desires, it's your emotions. There's a very, very good and solid intuition here. If you respond well to bad situations, right? If you're resilient through poverty, if you're brave against danger, that can be a good thing. And conversely, if you respond poorly to good situations, right? If wealth makes you prideful, if health makes you immoderate, that can be a terrible thing. So there's a very good intuition here. But again, the issue is that the Stoics have completely radicalized this intuition in at least 4 different directions. Now, the first way they radicalize it is to say, it's not just that virtue is important, it's the only thing that matters. It's not that externals are secondary. Externals don't matter at all, okay? The outcomes of your action just don't matter. Now, this sounds cool. I mean, it certainly sounds cool to 19-year-old me. But Cicero gives us an example to show just what this actually means, okay? So Cicero gives an example of 2 noble Roman statesmen, Quintus Metellus, Marcus Regulus. So both of these guys were consuls, highest office in Rome. They led armies, they were generals, and they were both remembered as basically as good as you can get in terms of Roman heroes. But there's a key difference between their lives, which is that Quintus Metellus won his key wars. And so he came back as a war hero. He was given a triumph, right? This is the best thing a Roman general could receive. And he watched his own sons become consuls as well. So he lives happily ever after, and he dies in old age surrounded by his loved ones. Regulus, Marcus Regulus, loses a key battle, is captured by the barbarians, and the barbarians send him back to Rome to negotiate a peace treaty. Marcus Regulus openly, when he's back in Rome, openly suggests against accepting the peace treaty, and then of his own will, this is legendary, but of his own will, returns to the barbarians to honor an oath saying that he would. So Marcus Regulus did what was good for the Republic, right? He argued against the peace treaties, and then to honor his oath, he went back, knowing full well that he would be tortured, starved, humiliated, and eventually killed, which he was. Okay? So no one is doubting whether either of these guys are virtuous. They're as good as you can get. But that's kind of Cicero's point. We might say Regulus was admirable. We might even want to say, look, Regulus lived perhaps a good life, but do we really want to say Marcus Regulus lived as good of a life as Quintus Metellus? The Stoic answer is yes. Insofar as they were fully virtuous, Quintus and Regulus were both happy and equally so. Okay? The results of your action do not matter for these guys, only what you do and how you do it. So if you win your war, you have this amazing family legacy, or you lose the war and you're tortured and humiliated and sickened and starved and eventually killed, doesn't matter. Okay, this is the view. Now you might think, look, the reason that, I'm defending the Stoics here, the reason that Regulus and Quintus lived equally happy lives is because of the type of virtuous activity they did, right? They commanded armies, they helped the Republic, they were these noble statesmen. So even though the outcome of their actions were radically different, it's the type of their virtuous activity and the nobility that comes with it. That's what makes them live equally happy lives. But that's not the Stoic view. If the first radicalization is to say the outcome of your virtuous action does not matter, the second radicalization is to say the type of your virtuous action does not matter. And that is a huge problem for the Stoics, because the domain of virtue spans so much of our lives that goes a lot beyond just these noble and shining examples of leading an army or like creating great pieces of art. The Stoics say, when a sage lifts his finger, he performs a virtuous action. That's how broad the scope of virtuous activity is. Okay, so I'm going to give you an extreme example now, just to tell you what's at stake here. So let's think about the most boring, tedious, demeaning, uninteresting task you could do. Wiping your ass after you take a shit, okay? That could be a virtuous action. You don't wipe too soft as to leave any residue. You don't wipe too hard as to damage the structure. That's virtue, okay? That's, according to nature, that's virtue. And the Stoics think that is as virtuous an action, this is one of the paradoxes that Cicero highlights, as anything that Quintus or Regulus did. So let's forget the comparison between Quintus and Regulus, okay? Because Cicero is letting the Stoics get off too easy. Let's say the comparison is between Quintus Metellus and a sage with uncontrollable diarrhea. Okay, and let's say that this sage, he was never a consul, he was never a general, he never lived a high life in Rome. He was captured as an infant. And the only domain that his captors allow him to express his agency is how he wiped his ass. And don't get me wrong, he gets it right every time, okay? Not too soft, not too hard. That's why they pay him the big bucks. That's why he's a sage. But let's say that's the only thing that he gets to spend most of his agency on. Who lives the happy life? Quintus Metellus or Captain Underpants? Insofar as they're fully virtuous, they're both happy and equally so. This is the Stoic view, okay? I'm not shitting you, pun intended. Now look, this is clearly an extreme example, but it's legitimate. They would be forced to say this. But I'm trying to use this to drive home a really important point here. Virtue sounds noble and high, okay? It calls to mind a general in shining armor, an artist at the peak of his creative abilities. And with those activities, it's more easy to see why the activity itself is sufficient to sustain a good life, regardless of the outcome. But virtue spans so much more for the Stoics. And for a lot of the mundane activities, it's not so clear to see why. So by not drawing a hierarchy between the virtues, what the Stoics are implicitly saying is meaning, variety, richness, impact, legacy, none of these factor into their conception of the good life, of what happiness is. All that matters is, did you respond well, regardless of what you're responding to, okay? Whether it's the onslaught of noble foe or it's the onslaught of diarrhea. Doesn't matter. And this is a serious problem, even outside the edge cases. Because if all you end up doing in your life, because I don't know, you were a slave or a peasant or homeless, if all you end up doing is just lowly tasks really well, they think that is as good of a life as if you live this rich, vibrant, and also virtuous life where you get to exercise the highest and most noble faculties of man. Okay. That's the second way the Stoics radicalize virtue, which is to say that the type of virtuous activity does not matter for happiness. The third way is even crazier. The type of vicious activity does not matter for your happiness. Happiness is a strict binary, and we're going to see why later on. Strict binary for the Stoics. You're either the sage and you're happy, or you're not and you're miserable. I quote to you Cicero. Oh, the sheer force of Zeno's intellect, that every person's foolishness, injustice, and other vices are alike, that all wrongdoing is equal, and that those who have progressed by nature and training far along the path to virtue are utterly miserable unless they have attained it. So Plato, that great man, supposing that he was not wise, was no better and lived no happier life than the most wicked of us. Okay. Plato, in the Stoics' view, is not just unhappy, he's miserable. But he's not just miserable, he's as miserable as Hitler. Plato is as miserable as Hitler because Plato is as vicious as Hitler. Again, this is just a Stoic view. There's no critique here, I'm just relaying the view. All right. Okay, that's pretty crazy, but I guess what that means then is that I just have to work really hard, right? I just gotta work really hard, be a sage, and then I'll be happy. How many sages have there been? The entire human history. I want to know my odds. 0. Okay, there's been 0 sages in all of human history. Sometimes the Stoics say Socrates was a sage. Sometimes they say, as frequent as a phoenix, like once every 500 or 1,000 years. But when we talk about what the sage is, you're going to see why the most likely answer is 0. Okay, so let me just be crystal clear here. This is the view. You can improve your virtue all you want, but until you are a full sage, you're not happy. Before you're happy, you're as miserable as the most vicious person who's ever lived. And in human history, there's been 0 sages. Okay, so therefore, everyone who has ever lived, no matter what they did, including the greats, Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, have failed equally, and that's the key term that really bothers me, equally at living the good life. Now, I gotta be fair to the Stoics. They talk often a lot about progress. There is a notion of progress. In fact, the components of Stoic happiness, contentment, joy, affirmation, these things do come in degrees, even if happiness itself doesn't. So the Stoics are fully willing to say, okay, I don't want to make this too ridiculous. The Stoics are fully willing to say, Plato has progressed more towards virtue, and therefore he is more contented, affirming, and joyful than Hitler. They will say that. But again, like I just said, they refuse to say the happy point, okay? They mean it when they say it, that Plato is as miserable as Hitler. And here's a Stoic metaphor relayed to us from Cicero to really get the point across. When submerged in water, one can no more breathe if one is just below the surface and on the verge of getting out than one can in the depths. In the same way, one who has made some progress towards the acquisition of virtue is just as unhappy as one who has made no progress at all. Okay, this is supposed to be a metaphor about how the Stoics conceive of happiness, and think about what that implies. When you're drowning, it doesn't matter if you drown a millimeter below the surface or in the depths of the ocean. The only thing you care about, for all intents and purposes, is can you breathe? That is what happiness is supposed to represent for the Stoics. If you have this, life is worth living. If you don't, it's not. Happiness is supposed to be this all-encompassing goal that's supposed to capture everything about a life that is well-lived and worth living. And what they're saying is, you can progress, okay? You can increase in the components of happiness all you want. You can progress along your path to virtue all you want. But in the same way, until you rise to the surface, you don't have the one thing that you're trying to get, the one thing that really matters for life. It doesn't matter how much you progress until you hit the surface, okay? For all intents and purposes, you drown in the exact same way that Hitler drowns, because both of you failed equally at getting the one thing that matters. Neither of you guys are breathing, okay? If you're wondering why they say this, this will be more clear when we talk about their equally bizarre view of human nature, okay? So just put a pin in that. So these are the first three radicalizations on virtue. The outcome of action, the type of virtue, the type of vice. None of these matter for happiness. And by the way, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that most modern pop Stoics don't even know that these are the positions that they're committed to. So hopefully by just laying them out in the sun to dry, so to speak, it's enough to discredit them. And I think the funny thing is, usually when you contextualize a philosophy, it starts to make more sense, right? Usually when you put it, against the other schools and the intellectual tradition that it burgeoned out of, things start to make more sense. It's the reverse for the Stoics, okay? When you put the Stoics next to the much more reasonable schools that it broke away from, like Aristotle, the whole thing makes even less sense of why they structure their philosophy this way. If you take away one message today, it's if you like Stoic intuitions, just follow Aristotle instead, okay? You get the focus on virtue. You get the resilience. You get the agency. You don't get any of these radicalizations. Aristotle recognizes differences between vice, of course, right? Aristotle also recognizes a hierarchy of virtue that's most suitable to man. But most importantly, Aristotle recognizes that externals do matter, even if not as much as usually people think. Okay, so this is what the debate between Aristotle and the Stoics are over. Do externals matter for happiness? The Stoics say no, they don't matter for happiness. That's why they call externals indifferents. Whereas Aristotle says, yes, but not that much, okay? So Aristotle has like a 95% virtue, 5% external view of happiness, whereas the Stoics have a 100% virtue, 0% externals view. So now that we've clarified the terms of the debate, I'm going to give you my critique of how the Stoics have radicalized this position on virtue. And I'm going to show you why Aristotle, I think, is right in this debate, with, again, another imminent critique from the Stoics. And the thread I'm going to start pulling on this time is the Stoic philosophy of suicide. okay? So for the Stoics, they have a very well-developed system of suicide. Suicide can be a virtuous act that even the sage performs. But why? You told me externals are indifferents. You told me you can be happy if you can be happy in any circumstance, why would you ever kill yourself? There's a few explanations here, but the most convincing theory, okay, the steel man, is that the sage kills himself when living itself becomes vicious. Okay, so here's an example. Cato the Stoic, who committed seppuku basically after he lost to Caesar. It wasn't that Cato was worried about, let's say, getting tortured by Caesar. It wasn't worried about losing his money to Caesar. He wasn't even worried when he killed himself because Caesar might drag along his family, right? Those are all just externals. Cato had to kill himself because to live would be to accept Caesar's clemency, which would be to recognize Caesar's legitimacy, which would be a betrayal of the Republic, okay? So the very act of Cato's living is vicious, and that's why he had to kill himself. But I thought you said all externals are indifferents, right? But now you're telling me, after the Civil War, the externals were such that there was no way Cato could have lived a virtuous life. It just had to be vicious or death. This is how the Stoics try to wiggle their ways out of this one. In the event that the sage recognizes externals are inhospitable to virtue, he kills himself, and the Stoics call that virtue. And so you see what I'm trying to say? He never loses his happiness because he's always virtuous, including the act of killing himself. So the Stoics are technically right. Externals can't harm the Stoics' happiness because in the event they can, they just kill themselves and call that virtue. Okay? I quote to you Seneca. Am I to think that fortune can do everything to a person as long as he remains alive? Rather, fortune can do nothing to a person as long as he knows how to die. Okay, I hope you guys can see how unsatisfying this is. I go to the Stoics trying to learn the art of life. Okay, the art of life, let me emphasize that word. Because I hear, Zeno has this crazy new technique that can make me happy no matter what. And then I find out that's only technically true by killing yourself when you can't be happy, okay? And this argument, by the way, this argument only works because of the fourth radicalization of Stoic ethics, which is the length of a virtuous life does not matter for your happiness, okay? The only way that the Stoic argument works is if they don't discriminate, which they don't, between the length of virtuous lives. So let's say I'm 27 now, just turned 27. Let's say I become a sage right now. Congratulations, by the way, first one in history. And let's say an asteroid comes and just squashes me right now. They would say, so I have like 1 millisecond as a sage. They would say that is as happy a life, equally well lived, as if I had lived to 100, taught all these other people how to be sages, and done all these good deeds. It's only with that crazy premise, okay, the fourth radicalization, that their argument around suicide works. So if you take this crazy premise away, then the debate becomes, do externals matter for happiness? If I want to keep on living, the Stoics would be forced to concede the ground to Aristotle. Because otherwise, their own theory, their own philosophy of suicide makes no sense. So if Cato wanted not just to be happy, but to live and be happy, that guy needed to win the Civil War, okay? So all we have to do is to add this one, I think, quite reasonable qualification of wanting to keep on living. And the Stoics themselves disprove themselves, okay? I quote you Seneca. If he encounters many hardships that banish tranquility, he releases himself. Nor does he do so only in the extremity of need. Rather, as soon as he begins to have doubts about his fortunes, he makes a careful assessment to determine whether it is time to quit. Remember, this is what the debate with Aristotle was about, right? Do externals matter for happiness? Can many hardships banish a sage's tranquility? And here we have Seneca on the record saying that it can. All right, so those are the four radicalizations and my imminent critique. And to summarize, the issue I have with Stoic ethics is that they draw an equal sign between completely unequal phenomena, okay? And here's Cicero making that exact point with a lot more eloquence. What then are your conclusions? That all who are not wise are equally miserable? That all who are wise are supremely happy? That all right acts are equally right and all wrongdoing is equally wrong? These maxims sound wonderful on first acquaintance, but become less convincing on mature reflection. Common sense, the facts of nature, and truth herself proclaim the impossibility of being persuaded that there was really no difference between all the things which Zeno made equal. This isn't where the craziness ends. This is where the craziness begins. Because right after completely flattening out the ethical landscape with these four radicalizations, right? After putting their stake, externals don't matter, external goods don't touch your happiness. They seemingly do a complete 180. And they say, external goods are indifference, but they're preferred indifference. So just as they take away these goods with their right, they then re-legitimize it with their left. And suddenly wealth, health, power, reputation, again become legitimate targets, scopos, for the Stoic. And just as we saw how odd Stoic ethics was when compared to the much more commonsensical Aristotle, we're now going to see how odd Stoic ethics is when compared to the much more congruent Cynics, okay? So the Cynics were another school that developed, roughly around the same time period. And like, overly simplifying here, but like the Stoics, they disagree with Aristotle. All those externals are indifference. They don't matter at all for your happiness. Unlike the Stoics, they act congruently to that belief. Diogenes the Cynic, the most famous of them, chose poverty, slept in a barrel with dogs, jacked off in public, shat in the theater, spat in people's faces in their houses. Okay, why? That's what you do. If you really think wealth is an indifferent, if you really think all these are just silly conventions that corrupt society has made you believe, why would you do anything else? So it's really on the backdrop of the Cynic just jacking off in his barrel, that the Stoic running around looking for wealth and good looks and honor and protecting his family look increasingly bizarre, right? You literally told me these things were indifference. And the obvious tensions in the philosophical views here are mirrored in the awkward language the Stoics had to invent to describe this view, okay? So I quote you Cicero in the voice of Zeno. Those things that you mentioned, health, wealth, and freedom from pain, I call not good, but brought forward. On the other hand, I call disease, poverty, and pain not evil, but if you please, worthy of rejection. So in the case of the former category, I speak not of seeking, but of selecting, not of wishing, but of adopting, while its opposite, one does not avoid, as it were, sets aside. Okay, so this is what a Stoic sounds like. Fine, sir, how dare you? I am not pursuing money. I'm only selecting money. Fine, sir, how dare you? I'm not avoiding danger. Okay, I'm no coward. I'm merely setting danger aside. Okay. They had to invent this new language to describe this equally awkward philosophical view. Okay, so why did they do this odd second move, right? Their answer is nature. If we observe nature, let's say human history, we'll see that life tends to go smoother when you're healthy rather than you're sick. So health is a preferred indifferent, okay? It's natural that we pursue health. But this answer opens up the Stoic to just more surface area of critique from both schools. Okay, Aristotle's gonna say, pulling all his hair out, that's what I've been trying to get you guys to say. If it is natural to be healthy, if life goes smoother when you're healthy, why the hell do you guys not factor it into the calculus of happiness? But the Cynics have an equally compelling critique. All right, the Cynics will say, look, let's say I grant you health, okay? That's natural, we can all see how that works. Why is wealth, why are good looks, why is noble birth in their list of preferred indifferent? These just seem like Roman values that they smuggled in through the back door. Because like Seneca, they're still greedily attached to these vain and worldly things, right? So that's the mystery. Why do the Stoics break away from these two much more reasonable views? And you know it's bad. When compared to your school, the Cynics are reasonable, okay? And we aren't going to find the answer to the question just within Stoic ethics itself. So just like the up to you argument was not self-sustaining, neither is Stoic ethics. The most idiosyncratic features of Stoic ethics can only be made sense of when we examine their view on human nature, of who they consider you to be. And so that's what we're going to move on to. Okay, so we looked at the up to you, we critiqued the virtue ethics. Now we're going to look at the third part of their theory, which is human nature. So to put it simply, the Stoics think you are just your soul. And more technically, you are the faculty of assent, the thing that does all those assents, but we'll just use soul for now to not confuse you. And there are two radical things about their picture of human nature. The first one is, you are just your soul. They mean it when they say it, okay? I quote to you Marcus Aurelius. Epictetus used to say, you are a little soul dragging around a corpse. Okay, that's what your body is. You're not a living body. You're not a body animated by a soul. Hell, you're not even a body and a soul. You are just your soul, and your body is dead weight. It's a corpse that you have to lug and drag around. So that's the first radical view of human nature. We are just our souls. The second radical part about this is just how extremely rational the Stoics thought the soul was. Okay, so if you remember, at the beginning of this lecture, when we were talking about up to you in a sense, they think that behind a whole host of human agency, behaviors, emotions, desires, we're actually assenting to different things. So if you shove me, I'm angry. It's because I assented. I've been harmed. Okay, shoving harms me. But it's actually a lot more logical and propositional than that. What you're assenting to is physical intrusions harm me. If I am harmed, it is appropriate for me to feel anger. A shove, being a physical intrusion, is now present. Therefore, the conclusion of this logic, it is now appropriate for me to feel anger. This is what the Stoics think is going on in your soul when you get angry, right? This is just how rational they think human nature is. You are just your soul. And your soul is basically just a computer, okay? That's the Stoic view. And I think it's only under the light of this radical view on human nature can the most idiosyncratic, let's put it that way, parts of their ethics be made sense of. Okay, so to take, for example, why is happiness a binary? Okay, why is Plato as miserable as Hitler? The rational part, right? The computer analogy really helps you with this. If I'm running a computer program, it doesn't matter if I'm missing one semicolon or my entire code base is gibberish. The thing is just not going to compile either way, okay? So either way, the thing's not going to run. And so in like manner, the soul, which is, again, you can think about it like a computer, has a database of all the assents you're assenting to at every given moment. And they're all interconnected in this hyper-rational way that I just listed out. If you have so much as one assent wrong, whole thing's corrupt, okay? So what the sage is someone who only strongly assents to clear propositions, what the technical term is cataleptic impressions, okay? By the way, that's probably why there's never been a single sage in the history of the world. That's how high the bar is. So it doesn't matter if you're Plato. You're just missing one semicolon, otherwise the thing's gonna compile. Or you're Hitler, the whole thing's gibberish. Both of you guys don't compile, both of you guys don't live the good life. The reason why things always come out as binaries for the Stoic, right? Happiness, misery, virtue, vice, is because of their rational view on human nature grounded on propositions. Propositions are either true or false, okay? Now here's another thing that this extreme view of human nature helps us explain, which is, why does the type of virtuous activity not matter, okay? It doesn't matter if you're Quintus Metellus or Captain Underpants, because all that matters is, are you assenting to the right propositions? If you wondered back then, why is the Stoic view of happiness so impoverished, right? Like, why is meaning, variety, legacy, impact. Why are none of these factors into their notion of happiness? It's because the subject for which they think happiness can be achieved is so circumscribed, right? The Stoic view of human nature retreats to the singularity of reason. So more so than tranquility, joy, and contentment, right? The things that we usually associate with Stoic practice. What is defining of Stoic happiness is just knowledge. Are you or are you not making the right ascents? Now, finally, I think this view on human nature also explains the Stoics' big break from Aristotle. It becomes a lot more obvious why externals don't matter to you if you are not your body. Wealth and poverty, pain and pleasure, honor and dishonor, these are the goods of the body, which are not you. If they're not you, it makes a lot more sense why they don't factor into your conception of happiness. Okay, so I hope you can see why the key tenets of Stoic ethics requires their equally radical view on human nature being right. And now I'm going to argue why I think it's wrong. Okay? The first thing I'll say, again, in defense of the Stoics, is that, again, there is a great and profound intuition here. So much of our lives that seem to be non-rational are actually grounded on rational propositions. This is why cognitive behavioral therapy works so well, by the way, where you go to a therapist and you try to uncover what unproductive ascents you're making. CBT was created largely inspired by the Stoics, okay? Which just shows you how much value there is in this intuition. But again, the issue is that they just radicalized it to the nth degree. So here's what the debate is over. The Stoics don't think the man is just reason. There's other stuff. There's habit, there's appetite, there's mimesis. The debate is over whether things always have to go through reason to motivate you, okay? So let's say I'm hungry. Reason doesn't have to operate yet. But if I act on that hunger, the Stoics think it's because the hunger changed one of the assents, changed one of the propositions in my database, where now I assent to it is appropriate for me to act on hunger. Now me, and I think most contemporary philosophers, think that no, a lot of these faculties can just motivate us directly without going through this rational process. Okay. So what I take issue with is not just the breadth of reason, that reason is seemingly behind everywhere in human nature, but also the extraordinary power that the Stoics invested with, okay? And here's a story to give you an idea of what I mean by that. When his master was twisting his leg and torturing him, Epictetus said, smiling and unmoved, "You're gonna break my leg." And when it was broken, he added, "Did I not tell you that you would break it?" The Stoic claim is, the reason that Epictetus is so resilient is simply because he assented. Pain is not an evil. So the claim is, if you assent, pain is not an evil, while you are being tortured, you're just cracking jokes and giggling and like smiling. Does reason really have that kind of power? Okay, so I've simply told you what my issues are. Now I'm going to raise an imminent issue, okay? It's not an imminent contradiction this time. It's just a really big issue that the Stoics have to deal with because of their hyper-rational view of human nature. And it's, how do you transition from a non-rational toddler to a fully rational man? Okay, here's the issue. When a toddler is feeling joy, when he's, let's say, being breastfed, it's not because the toddler is assenting, well, titties are good. If there's a good that's present, I ought to feel joy. Titties are present, therefore I ought to feel joy. Okay, toddlers do not assent to that. I, on the other hand, would assent to that, and I'll tell you all about it when the cameras turn off during the Q&A. But here's the issue, okay, which is, how does toddler grow up to be a fully rational man where now his joy is grounded on all these rational propositions? And look, I think I can tell a congruent story for the Stoics, on the Stoics' behalf, if not for the fact that, again, they think rationality is a binary. You're either fully rational or you're fully not rational. So the story that the Stoics themselves are forced to tell is that, little Jimmy goes to bed, either when he's 7 or 14. He goes to bed like an animal, okay? It's just all impulse going there. They say that little Jimmy's speech is like that of a parrot and not a human. 7 or 14, his birthday hits. He wakes up rational, okay? Which, to put it lightly, doesn't seem very plausible. So again, there's no contradiction this time, right? It's just a huge imminent issue. I just want to show you the strain that this hyper-rational and binary view of human nature puts on the Stoic system. But even if we pretended, this issue doesn't exist at all. There's still a major question. Why are we just our souls? And why are our souls just pure reason? And again, like we saw with Up to You, like we saw with Stoic ethics, Stoic human nature is not self-grounding, and it requires a reliance on Stoic cosmic nature, Stoic religion. Okay, so now we've arrived at Zeus. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the third part of the critique, human nature, to the last part, cosmic nature. So the Stoics believed in a rational universe governed by nature, logos, reason, Zeus. These things are all interchangeable. So Zeus, he's pure reason. He permeates the cosmos, including us. Okay? So do you see now why the Stoic human nature starts to make a lot more sense? If there's a purely rational God, and we have a part of Zeus in us, there's also a part of us that's purely rational. Stoic religion, I think, is also needed to explain why the Stoics broke away from the Cynics. Okay, so remember, the debate over here is, okay, I thought you told me externals don't matter. Why are you going out pursuing all this stuff? The Stoics believed in divine providence, that Zeus has a benevolent and all good plan, that this is the best of all possible worlds, and that we ought to be co-authors in that providence. Okay, so even though wealth and good looks and noble birth are indifferents, we ought to shepherd them in our imitation of Zeus. So it's by looking at how Zeus, grows plants to feed the animals and then uses the corpse of animals to, again, nourish the plants, we see the incredible harmony that exists in the universe. And as a result, we are being invited to be co-rulers with Zeus. Okay? I quote to you Cicero relaying this view. Man himself was born for the sake of contemplating and imitating the cosmos. He's not at all perfect, but he's a certain small portion of what is perfect. Okay, so to summarize this entire journey, we started off with a very benign and innocuous advice. Focus on what is up to you. But to truly make sense of that, to truly understand why they prescribe that, we've had to arrive at Zeus. Stoicism is a religion, and it requires those cosmological commitments just as much as the other religions, like Christianity and Buddhism, for its ethics to work. There's a lot more about this religion that we haven't covered, okay? There's big bangs, big crunches, there's an eternal recurrence, there's a whole theory around divination, right? Trying to figure out what Zeus is trying to tell us. And so the cosmological claims of Stoicism, this is the point I'm trying to make, are no less extravagant than the kind of organized religions that a lot of modern rational Stoics laugh out the door. Now, in defense of the Stoics, they have no need of anything like Christian revelation or Christian faith. For them, all of these religious claims don't come from super-rational revelation, but it comes from their natural philosophy, right? They think it can be grounded on reason. Okay, so for example, intelligent design arguments for divine providence. But frankly, I take that as a knock against Stoicism, okay, in favor of Christianity, because that just grotesquely exaggerates what reason can do. My favorite parts of Christianity are when I'm being told I'm a complete idiot, I'm a puny little earthworm, I should stop trying to figure shit out by myself and just do what God tells me. Okay, when God comes down to Job, who the hell are you? Where were you when I was making the cosmos? You tell me if you know. Or when Dante, right, he's in paradise, goes to the eagle of justice, and he says, what about the poor pagan, the poor virtuous pagan, who never had an opportunity to come to Christ? Why is he in hell? You know what the eagle of justice says? None of your damn business. Okay, you sit there, a short-sighted human, from afar, trying to judge God. And in the next canto, he says, dude, I'm the eagle of justice. I don't even know how this thing is supposed to work, okay? I just follow God's will and I take pleasure in that. If you're going to give me radical cosmological claims, at least have the decency of telling me I'm a complete idiot, okay, that has no hope of figuring it out for himself. I'm not saying that's convincing, but I'm saying that's a lot more compelling than what the Stoics are trying to do, which is, here's a syllogism QED. Okay, so Stoicism is just as much of a religion as Christianity. And it's a lot weaker because it attempts to ground itself on reason. Now, I need to be fair again to the Stoics. There's a huge debate going on right now in the literature about whether the ethics can be pulled apart from its cosmology and used as a standalone. There are serious scholars who think that this can be done. I'm on the other side for all the reasons we described. Like, how do you justify the death of your kid not mattering for your happiness from regular moral intuitions? If you're interested in the other side, by the way, you can watch my lecture on Marcus Aurelius, which is an attempt to justify positively all of their crazy radicalizations without an appeal to Zeus, just by appealing to regular moral intuitions. I don't think I was successful, but I'll let you guys decide for yourselves. But let me just give you one example to show you how intimately tied its ethics is with its religion, okay? And again, it has to do with this idea of divine providence. Zeus has this providential plan for us. This is the best of all possible worlds. So when your kid dies, for seemingly no reason, it's not just a dispreferred indifferent that you can be resilient to. You affirm that. You affirm it because it is a necessary and rational step in the progress of the cosmos. This is the best of all possible worlds. So if your kid had actually lived, the world would have been worse off. Either because, I don't know, your kid's gonna grow up and be Hitler, or Zeus needed to open up another spot in the kindergarten for the next Einstein. You don't know, but you affirm it because you have this background assumption of divine providence, okay? Here's another example. The Stoics often say, if I know what Zeus wants me to do, I do that. But if I don't, then I focus on the preferred indifference. So if I don't know what Zeus wants me to do, I be fruitful and multiply, okay? I have children, I take care of them. That's what seems to be natural. But if Zeus tells me, like he did Abraham, I want you to kill your kid right now, you kill your kid right now, okay? This is what the Stoics tell us. The religious imperative of following Zeus supersedes the ethical imperative of selecting preferred indifference. So this is how core religion is to Stoicism. And I think it's only under the light of Stoic religion can the most puzzling questions about their ethics be made sense of. But of course, okay, this cosmology raises a bunch of questions and imminent issues of its own, right? Here's a very simple one. In the same way that the death of my kid was affirmable because it was a necessary step towards the best of all possible worlds, so is my vice. All the vicious actions I've done, it would have either been impossible or the world would have been actually worse off had I performed virtue instead. Okay, so this is just a classic problem of evil. And the Stoics don't have any better resolutions than the one you hear from other religions, right? So the point is, even the religion is not just a magical wand that just waves all these problems away. Okay, that's the end of the lecture. That's my critique of Stoicism. To summarize, we looked at 4 key components. There are parts we haven't looked at yet, like logic and epistemology, but we looked at 4 key components of the Stoic system. We looked at up to you, we looked at virtue, its ethics, human nature, and cosmic nature. And what we found in each step were 3 big issues. Number 1, the ideas sound good. There's radical implications if you think them through. Number 2, there are often massive, imminent tensions, if not just downright contradictions, within each step and between steps sometimes. And number 3, even if none of those imminent contradictions existed, it requires grounding from more and more foundational parts of the theory that become more and more radical until we get to Zeus, okay? And this is how that goes. Focus on what is up to you, all right? But why should I focus on what is up to me? Because virtue is the only thing that matters for your happiness. Okay, but why is virtue the only thing that matters for your happiness? Because you are just your soul and your soul is pure reason. Okay, but why am I just my soul and my soul is pure reason? Because of the nature of Zeus and your relationship with him, okay? And what's so frustrating? about all of this is that within each of these, I would call them missteps, contains so valuable intuitions that deserve to be pulled out and applied to our lives. Reading Stoicism this past year has just been like watching that Jordan Peterson interview in Channel 4. You know what I'm talking about? Where he's being quizzed by this British journalist. And then Peterson just makes a benign comment. And then the journalist just says, "So you're saying," and then proceeds to completely misrepresent what he said by radicalizing it. Okay, so Peterson goes, "Men are more disagreeable than women. So you're saying women are slaves and we should repeal the 19th? I'm paraphrasing here. That's how reading Stoicism feels like, okay? Where you're like, man, that's a good intuition. Virtue is important. So you're saying you don't give a rat's ass if your kid died right in front of you. Or, man is a rational creature. So you're saying our bodies are corpses that we lug around, and Plato's as vicious as Hitler." That's what reading Stoicism feels like for this past year. Welcome to my world. But now to end this lecture, I want to make right on my promise, like Regulus, and give you guys an answer, a reason for why I'm going to keep on reading the Stoics, despite thinking they got it all fantastically wrong, comically so. It's because they got it wrong, but in the right direction. Okay, and this is what I mean. Let's say we painted a spectrum of how much external goods and how much virtue matters for happiness. I'm on this side, okay? So I'm a vicious little man. 95% external goods, 5% virtue. Aristotle's over here. 95% virtue, 5% external goods. The Stoics are even further right, more extreme than Aristotle. 100% virtue, 0% external goods. The Cynics are even more extreme, okay? 100% virtue, no preferred indifferent. And it's precisely because of that extremism that wrestling with the Stoics in the past year has been so philosophically fruitful and impactful for me. Because it's by having to wrestle and defend and attack these extreme positions that made me truly understand how important virtue is, how not important external goods are, how out of control the world is, and how rational the human psyche is. Even if it's not as extreme as the Stoics claim it is, right? And so what's ironic is that I feel like if I had just read Aristotle, I would have been too complacent, right? Because Aristotle says stuff like, well, sometimes health matters, wealth matters, and if you're not good looking and tall with a deep voice, it's over for you. And reading that, you can get the wrong impression of the 95-5. But with the Stoics, you're never going to make that mistake, right? The Stoics were able to shock me into the Aristotelian position in a way that Aristotle, I think, couldn't have directly. So the way I feel about the Stoics is the exact way that the Stoics feel about the Cynics, the people who are even more extreme than them. Because you might think, look, these noble Stoics, senators, they're emperors, they're going to look down on these bums, right? They're going to see these people as low lives, essentially. But that's not the case at all. In fact, whenever the Cynics are brought up, the Stoics are often openly admiring, if not just drooling and fawning. Marcus Aurelius speaks about Diogenes in the same breath he speaks of Socrates. Zeno, the founder, trained with a Stoic, Crates, and Epictetus calls the Cynics messengers from God. They're messengers from God because even if the Cynics, this is from the Stoic position, right, got it all wrong, they were wrong in the right direction. And so their extreme asceticism, even if it's completely outrageous from the Stoics' perspective, is a useful reminder of what man is capable of how little these external goods really matter for happiness, and it pushes the Stoic along their path of progress. And that's my exact attitude towards the Stoics. They are heroic. they show us what man is capable of, okay? Even if that showing was completely unnecessary and unproductive. And so in the exact same way, the Stoics point to the Cynics and they go, look at these crazy bastards, jacking off in a barrel, shitting everywhere, spitting on people's faces, but it's awesome because it reminds us what man is capable of. I point to the Stoics and I go, look at these crazy bastards. Being all happy when their kid dies, giggling and making jokes when they're getting tortured. But it's awesome. They showed me what man is capable of. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I will keep reading the Stoics, my admirably wayward friends. Thank you.
Thanks for watching my lecture. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas, then go join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to future lectures and events. Now after this, I suggest you check out my lecture on Marcus Aurelius, which is my best defense of Stoic ethics, or my various interviews with Stoic scholars to hear what they have to say about my criticisms. You can find the links to those episodes in the description, as well as on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.